Okay, Parshas Tetzaveh. So let's discuss something outside of the book for a few minutes on this Parsha. Parshas Tetzaveh is this week's Parsha, of course. Now, it deals primarily with the Kohanim's clothing. That's primarily what it is. The Kohanim wore certain clothes, the Kohen Gadol wore certain clothes. And that's primarily what this Parsha deals with. Not exclusively. There are some other details and some things from the Mishkan that are carryovers from last week, which dealt with all the objects in the Mishkan, or the traveling temple. But this week it's primarily talking about the clothing. And so I want to comment on one thing in the clothing especially. And that is that the Kohen Gadol, he wore some special things that nobody else wore. And he wore them not just because they were clothing. Right? In other words, a Kohen had to wear a uniform. Why a regular Kohen wore special clothing was because they were different than the rest of the people, but they were similar. But the Torah wanted them all to be similar. They should all look the same, so that when you went to the temple to offer a sacrifice, you didn't want to go and see Joe the Kohen. You would give it to any Kohen because they're all the same. They dressed the same. Right? And that's what, for instance, when you go to the army, one of the reasons that army has uniforms, there are many reasons, but one is uniformity. That's what a uniform is. So that you're all the same. You all look the same. So everybody feels a part of a team. I'm not an individual that's going to run away, or I'm not an individual that's going to not listen to the orders and run in and try to kill the enemy. I'm part of a team. I'm together with everyone. So we all look the same, so we feel that we're blending together. The Kohanim had the same idea. They looked different than the average person because they all wore a uniform, but they all looked like each other, so that when you came there, you didn't go to a specific Kohen that you happened to like, right? You would go to the Kohen because he represented something. He did not represent himself. That's the idea. The Kohen Gadol, who is unique among his brothers, the Kohanim, in that he is the high priest, so he had this similar uniform, but with some other aspects to it that made it unique in that uniform, so that he would stand out. Now, two of those things I want to talk about first. And that's one is called the Choshen HaMishpat, and one is called the Tzitz. Now, the Tzitz was a thing that he wore on his head, and it says in the Torah that he has to do that. That he's required to wear the tzitz on his head. First, right here, we're still talking about the Kohen in the beginning, but we'll get to the Kohen Gadol, and he says as follows, that let's see if I can find it just while I'm looking through it, that the tzitz was worn, it's on 473, you actually see a picture of it, and it's in verse 36, and it says, you should make yourself this head plate of gold, and you should write upon it, it should say, Kadosh Lashem, holy to God. That's what it, see the picture there in the corner? The tzitz, so the tzitz was worn by the Kohen Gadol. And if you read the commentaries tell you that the tzitz, which it says in the Torah, was worn on the head. What the purpose of it was for prophetic purposes. The Kohen wore it because this object assisted him, the Kohen Gadol that is, and being able to get answers to questions that he didn't know. That was from prophecy. That God sent prophecy to him. And you see in the commentaries that it actually says this, and it tells you that it says tzitz, Rashi says, kamin tashel zahavaya. It's like sort of like a tail made out of gold, but it was worn on his head. Rochav beitach bosav. Its width is 2 fingers, and it says, and it was worn ala matach ma'ozim ozen, and it was worn from ear to ear, like in the sense like this. They wore it from ear to ear. That's how Rashi explains it. Right now, the Torah tells us, right, that he has to wear it on his head. Now, there's another object that the Torah talks about, and it's a little earlier here. If you look on 470, you'll see it. It's called the Choshen. The Choshen was worn on his chest. Right, that's where he wore it. But the Torah tells you that he wore it al halev. It says here, you al halev. It should be on your heart, right? Now, of course, your heart's inside, but it means on your chest, right? Because like when we say in your heart, right, that on your body, you touch here. So the idea being is that he wore that on his heart. So that's also very nice. He wore this Choshen, the Kohen Gadol, and also the commentaries say the purpose of this was also for prophecy. That if someone would ask him a question, and it would not be possible for him to know the answer. Like say, someone would come and say, "Who should I marry?" Or should we go to war? Or should we, should we make peace with these people? They come to the Kohen Gadol, they ask him. So the Kohen Gadol would not, in and of himself, know the answer. He wasn't, necessarily a person who knew everything, right? And of course, some of these answers, there's no way of knowing. You just have to understand it. So he would use this choshen, which was on his chest, in order to receive prophecy, and he'd answer the questions, right? That was the purpose of it. And now we have a problem, really, because we have two objects that the Kohen Gadol wore that have the same purpose. One is the purpose is that on his head is for prophecy, and one on his heart is for prophecy. So why do we have two? One should be sufficient. If he wears one on his head, and you ask him a question he doesn't know, he receives a prophetic vision from God. God tells him the answer. He tells you the answer. God comes, he asks him a question, he doesn't know the answer. He gets a prophetic vision from God because of the choshen or because of the tzitz. But why both? It doesn't make sense. Like the Torah, God is not going to create a superfluous thing. It's one or the other. He has to wear both, and yet each one independently seems to do the same job. Right? You see the question? It doesn't seem to be necessary. So if you look in the wording in the Torah, you actually can find an answer to this question. And the wording is that it says that the Kohen has to wear the tzitz on his head, and he has to wear the choshen on his heart, right? Meaning his chest. So the commentaries can explain to us the following. When a person gets questions, there are different types of questions. There are some types of questions where simply you need an answer. Right? It's very simple. Am I allowed to light a match on Shabbat? Right? Yes or no? It's a simple question. Right? I can look in a book. The book will give me the answer. I look in a Jewish law book. It gives me the answer. So simple Jewish law. Right? If somebody comes and want to have a question, I get 20 of these a day. People call me on the phone. Rabbi, I put a milk spoon in a meat pot. Rabbi, I bought this food. Is it kosher? Rabbi, I need to go to somebody's house and I'm not sure about this or this or this. These are all black and white questions. Anybody who can look in a book can answer the questions. I happen to be versed in it because I get the questions all the time. So sometimes I don't have to look in the book. I'll know the answer. And people will call me for that. That's what I do, part of what I do. But then I get another type of question, which more often happens when somebody comes to see me. They don't usually just ask me a question like this. And because it's I'd say has more serious ramifications, these questions, and that there is an application of individuality in the question. In other words, somebody will come and they'll say that they're having, they've had this issue with their spouse, and now a legal issue has arisen in it, and they don't know what to do. Or they have a problem that has much larger implications, like having children, having problems having children, or they want to stop having children for a period of time, and they want to ask these questions. And these questions are not simple, open a book, black and white, that's the answer. Certainly the book gives us guidelines, right? We get everything from the Torah, so that's there. But you have to know, if one person asks me a question, another person asks me a question, the answer may not be the same, even if the circumstances are the same, because you have to know the people who are asking you, right? And that's exactly what the Torah is telling us here, that the Kohen Gadol, he had two objects that he used for prophecy. The one that was on his head, that is, he used pure logic. He just used his intelligence. That was for questions that are black and white. You need intelligence. You need to have the knowledge. So you either know it or you look in a book. So in his case, he either knew it or he had a prophetic vision that told him the answer. But it's a black and white question with a black and white answer, and it's the same answer for whoever asked the question. Do I put on tefillin in the daytime or do I put it on at nighttime? If any man who asks that question, it's going to get the same answer. You don't put on tefillin at night, you put it on in the daytime. I pray morning service in the morning, I don't pray it at night. Right? That's the answer. That kind of question is reserved for an intellectual answer. In other words, you use your mind. I think about your question and I answer it. It's very simple. So therefore, then the Kohen would use the tzitz, the one on his head, for the prophetic vision. But if you look in the commentaries and they say, what is the purpose of the choshen? Which I said before, the Torah says is put it al halev, on the heart of the high priest. It says the purpose of the choshen, the example they give is that if somebody came, the nation comes and they said, should we go to war? Should we go fight a war? The Kohen could, through prophetic vision, find out if God wants them to fight this war. Right? That's not a black and white question. You can't open a book and get that answer, because it may be to this time that it's a just war. Maybe for the next time somebody comes, it's not a just war. Maybe this is a milchamas mitzvah, all right, a war that's a mitzvah. Maybe the next time it's only a permissible one, or maybe it's forbidden to go to war. You have to take into account who goes to war. Young boys go to war, 18-year-old boys. 18-year-old boys have mothers. They have brothers, they have sisters, they have lives. Some of them might be married if they're a little older. Right? There's ramifications. You go to war, people die. People get hurt. There's injuries. It's not black and white in a book like you had with the other question. This is a question where it's not enough to just think of the answer intellectually. You have to have compassion. You have to feel for the people who are asking the question. You have to look into the future, so to speak, as to the effect of the answer of your question. And then after you know the law, and you know how to apply the law, and you apply compassion to the law, and you think about the vision of what is going to happen. You send someone to war, somebody's going to die. Nobody's dead now, but in the future somebody will. Now, you have to think about that before you tell the nation to go to war. When somebody comes and they have a question about getting married, right, or getting divorced, or having children, these questions are different for every person who comes. It's not black and white. You come to me and you say you want a divorce, right? So certainly we want to do counseling, but sometimes it's good to get a divorce. Sometimes the situation is you have to have a divorce, and sometimes it's the wrong thing. But it's not black and white in a book. It has to be here. So therefore, what the Torah is telling you is that there are occasions when Torah is conveyed through intellectual information. You sit, you study Torah, you get the answer. That's the tzitz. That's the purpose of it. It's black and white. Yes or no. Do I do this? Do I not do this? But when it comes to something that has the ramifications that really can affect people, there a Kohen Gadol or a rabbi or a parent or any leader of any sort has to know that in order to implement the will of God, or to implement the Torah, one has to have compassion. You have to feel for the people that you're talking to. And you have to understand the situation of those people, and you have to understand the ramifications of what you're saying. And then you can answer the question. Therefore, you need the choshen. You need the one that's over your heart, right, where your emotions are as well. In that case, you combine intellect with emotion. So here we now understand that when the Torah gives us two things that the Kohen Gadol used in order to receive prophecy, they were sending a message to the Kohen Gadol and to us that when it comes to leading, and it comes to answering questions, and it comes to guidance, you don't have peripheral damage. You don't say, well, we have to go to war. If, you go to war, people die. You want to make an omelet, you got to break the eggs. No, we don't say that. We have to think it through. We have to understand it. We have to have compassion. We have to care for the people. And so that's why the choshen is there. So now we can understand why there were two different devices that were used. And the ultimate goal of combining the two and using the intellect tempered with emotion so that we can feel the compassion, the pain of others, and then we can answer the question. The difference, in my opinion, between a good rabbi, even a good doctor, is not necessarily just the knowledge that they have. I mean, there are certainly rabbis who know a lot more than me. There are doctors who know a lot more than my doctor. But the real question is, how do you apply what you do know? And do you have the ability to find out what you don't know? And if somebody comes and asks a question, and the rabbi is not compassionate and doesn't feel for that person, then the rabbi is making a mistake. And the doctor with no bedside manner is making a mistake. That's the reality there. Like they tell the story of Rabbi Chaim from Brisk, who was the great Brisker rabbi who, from him comes all the Soloveitchiks. You may have heard that name because it's a very famous rabbinic name. And it says that somebody came and asked him a question once and asked, are you allowed to use milk for the 4 cups of wine on Passover? Because clearly the man was poor, he didn't have the money for wine, but perhaps he had access to a cow, so he had milk. He wanted to know, you have to use the 4 cups. God did not bless me with enough money to buy wine, so can I use milk? So Rabbi Chaim thought about the question. It's a simple black and white question that yes, you can. If it's necessary, you can. That's black and white. You can use your head for that. But he didn't use his head. He used his heart. He thought about it. And he didn't just use his head. He said he knew the answer was yes. But what he did is he arranged for this man to not only have wine, because clearly he didn't have wine, but he also sent him over meat. He says, well, why would he send him meat? He says, because if the man comes to him and says, can I use milk for my Passover Seder, then clearly he doesn't have money for wine, and he doesn't have money for meat, because if he had money for meat, he wouldn't be using milk, right? You can't have milk and meat together in the same meal. So therefore, Rabbi Chaim thought with his heart and his head, and he realized that this man is in great need. So he didn't only give him the wine so that he'd be able to use wine, but he gave him meat to have a meal. That, you see, is how a person can answer a question with his heart. He uses the intellect, he tempers it with his feelings. And that's what it's talking about here in this case, in the same idea.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How come he doesn't have tzitzit?
How come he doesn't?
Yeah.
Well, it's not part of his uniform because all men are required to wear them.
But the Kohen does not. What is so significant about him that he's not obligated to wear tzitzit?
I'm not positive. I don't know. I didn't know that was the case. I'd have to look that up to see. Okay, we have a whole description now of what the order is of the Kohanim, what they do with various sacrifices, right, after they would prepare themselves by putting on these special uniforms, and then it talks about some spices that it's at the end. It talks about these various spices that the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol would offer. Basically what happened is you have a myriad, a whole selection of different spices. And God gives a prescription to, it talks about it on 483 and 482. But God gives a prescription to the Jewish people. This is how you create the spice. What are they really creating? They're creating incense. That's what it really is. Because they're burning the spices. Now, we don't usually do that in our lives. We don't, right? If we want to burn incense, we have spices for food. But the spices they're talking about had fragrances. And when they were burnt, they would create a fragrance. And this fragrance is what God wanted in the temple. So he prescribed exactly what this smell should be. And he described how he created it was by taking various different spices and combining them together in order to make what it says in the Torah is a pleasant aroma to God. Now, if you would look at all of the objects in here, the Torah tells you that any one of these spices, if you would leave it out from what God tells you. Let's say he tells us 40 spices, and you put in 40, but you switched one. Or you put in 39 because you couldn't get one. Right? He says you're not allowed to use it. If you use it, a person is responsible for their own life. In other words, they could be killed for this purpose. It's a significant error, and one should not do that. Now, if you look at the spices, some of the spices are very fragrant spices. Right? That if you burn them, they're going to smell very nice. We know that cinnamon smells nice, right? We know that. We know that there's many spices that have a very nice fragrance, and we like those spices. There are other spices which have horrible fragrances. They're not even called fragrances. They'll be odors. They're horrible. They sulfur makes a horrible smell, right? There are many things that if you burn them, they have a horrible smell. And some of the objects within this, what we call the ketoris, this mixed spices, had a horrible smell. Terrible smell. And you mix it together, and it became a part of the entire thing. So you imagine that you're a person, and your job is to make these spices. And you decide, I don't want to make the spices like this. I want to use what God said, but this one spice has a horrible odor. I want to take this spice out, and I'll use the rest. In other words, I'm not going to do exactly like God said because I don't want to have this bad smell in there. I want to have only good smells. So that person is responsible for his own life. In other words, he's put himself in a very bad situation. By him doing that, it's a very serious problem. But what really is the problem? What is the message the Torah is telling us when it says you can't take out the bad odors from the fragrances of the spices? And the point here is that fragrances are firstly a very important thing. We're going to learn more when we talk about the holiday of Purim in a few minutes about the importance of fragrance and why it's so extraordinary. But one thing's for sure, a fragrance has the ability to affect us very greatly. And you can walk in the mall and smell a perfume or smell something cooking or a powder that somebody is wearing, and it can transport you back in a moment 30 years. You can suddenly smell a fragrance is the same perfume, for instance, or the same powder that your mother wore. And you smell that, and suddenly your mind goes right back, and you see your mother. And she may not even be alive for years and years and years, but yet a fragrance can do that. You can walk into a room and smell a certain fragrance, and it reminds you of something. Because a fragrance has a very surreal and very spiritual ability to it, right? Because a fragrance has no substance. There's nothing. You can't touch a smell, right? It doesn't have a weight. It's just something that you can touch, you can smell. It's a very spiritual type of sense, and we'll learn about it again, as I said, when we'll talk about Purim in a few minutes. Therefore, the idea of a fragrance, it is symbolic of the human soul, of the soul of a person. And as you can have a soul or not have a soul, and you don't weigh any more or any less. Right? You can't measure it. You can't weigh it. You cannot in any way really define a soul through physical measure. And the difference between a living person and a not living person, for a person who simply dies, right, or they would say dies of old age, the difference is that they have a soul, they don't have a soul, but you can't measure it. Right? There's no way of measuring it. The soul has no way of being measured. And just like fragrances have no way to be measured, so too the soul does. And therefore there's a symbolic relationship. When the Jewish people are offering sacrifices in the temple, one of those is a sacrifice with the fragrances. It's a very important one. It's offered on a very special golden table that is different than all the other sacrifices are offered, and it's very close to the Holy of Holies. So it's a very extraordinary thing. And in it, it has good fragrances and bad fragrances that all combined together makes a pleasant aroma to God, it says. The fact that there is a lacking, that there are these negative spices in there, and you want to take them out, but God says if you do, you're responsible for your own life. The point is as follows. If the spices are symbolic of the human soul, so then God is saying that there are many types of people in the world, many types of Jews in the world. There are very good Jews. There are Jews who try but aren't so good. There are Jews who don't try at all. There are Jews who don't know better. There are Jews who are really not very nice people. There are all kinds. Right? There are all kinds. Our job is to become the best person we can be. But the reality is, you look in the world, you see people who are not necessarily such great people that you'd want to associate with. So God says that in the ultimate end, our goal is to unify the Jewish people. That all Jews need to become unified. And that means that there are times when we are going to have to associate with people who might not be the ones that we choose first. The ones who are like us, the ones who are as observant as us, the ones who are as sophisticated, kind as us. No, they could be crude, they could be different, they could be many things. But yet the Torah wants us to include them as a part of the Jewish people. And that if we exclude them, we are doing something wrong. And that's the symbol of the spices. The spices symbolize the Jewish soul, of which what every Jew has. You can be a good Jew, you can be a bad Jew, you can be an ignorant Jew, you can be a bad person. You still have a Jewish soul. And therefore there are times when every Jew must be counted and included, and the spices symbolize that. That if you would take the odor, the bad smell, the spice that smells terribly, out of all of it, that's wrong. You can't do that. The only basis for having these spices is where there is something bad and something good, all mixed together, all of them put together. And when you have them all together, then that's the way God wants it. It says also, if you want to, let's say you want to make the spices smell even better, you want to add honey to the spices. It says it's also, you're responsible for your own life. You can't do that. You can't put honey in there. You say, well, why not? It only makes it smell better. Because the point is that this is how it's prescribed. And it's prescribed that it can't have any additives, it can't have any additions, it can't have anything else but the pure soul of the Jewish people. The good souls and not as good souls, the disciplined souls and the less disciplined souls, all together. And if you would exclude one group of Jews from that, then you are responsible for your own life.
That smell thing has something to do with the spices with smell in the Abdallah, or
In the what?
Abdallah?
Yeah, there's definitely the idea in Havdalah when we have spices is because we understand that there's a change in our neshama when Shabbat ends. And it says that you have neshama yesera, which means, most people think it means that you have an additional soul. You have two souls. You have your regular soul and then you have a special Shabbos soul. I don't think that's what it means. What I think it means is neshama yesera means additional soul, not another soul, which means that your soul expands. Your soul becomes more spiritual on Shabbat. After Shabbat ends, it goes back. That's why people seem to have a letdown on Saturday night. They want to go out. They want to do something because they're feeling a lacking, but they don't know what it is. Their soul is contracting. When you smell the spices, Since spices are spiritual, and your soul is spiritual, it's a form of consolation. Like when you console somebody who lost a loved one, you're consoling the soul for having lost the spectral part from Shabbos. So that's why we use the spices. It's the same concept. Okay? So that's a bit of a touch on the spices. But since we're talking of, before we get into the talking of the spices in the idea of Purim, let's take a look at, for our discussions at the special section that we're going to read this week. A very special closing to the Torah. Rather than usually you read through the whole Parsha, and then you take the last piece and you read it again. That's called the maftir. And that's what's done every week, unless there's a special occasion. And this week is a special occasion for all Jews. And it's called Parshat Zachor, the Parsha of remembrance. That is, the Parsha where we remember something. What are we remembering? Here we're remembering that Amalek. Amalek was the nation that is considered to be the epitome of evil in the world. That just as the Jews are the moral leaders of the world, that our goal is to cause the world to become ethical, that people should act in an ethical manner. That's our goal as Jews in the world. There is also a group of people in the world whose job is, not their job, it's who they are, is the opposite. Is to take godliness out of the world, to make people not believe in a purpose for the world, that everything is random. They're there for evil. They want to destroy the conveyors of ethics, as they want to kill the Jews. And Amalek is considered the greatest enemy to the Jewish people. When we went out of Egypt, we read in the Parsha just a short while ago that after we came out of Egypt and we went through the splitting of the Red Sea and we received the Torah, you can imagine the Jewish nation is flying high. They're the most powerful nation. Right here, God is with them, and the whole world knows it. The Egyptians, who were their enemies, were destroyed by God closing the sea on them. So they're flying high. So Amalek says, enough of this. And they started going after the Jews. They attacked the Jewish people, right when the Jews were the strongest. And their idea was, is just like, as Rashi explains from the Talmud, like, when you have a hot bath, very hot bath. So when you go in there, right, it burns. Right? After a while, you get used to it, but it's very hot. But what happens is that when you go into a bath, your body will absorb some of the heat, and the water will actually get colder. Right? Water cools down. That's what happens in a bathtub. It doesn't stay hot forever. It gets cold. Many reasons. The air, right, makes it colder. Your body being in it makes it colder. Many things do. So it says, the Talmud uses the expression that when Amalek went after the Jewish people in the desert, they said, here the Jews are hot. Right? They've got God with them. All of these amazing miracles are happening to them. They're the hottest nation in the world, and our job is to cool them down. So it was like the first person to jump in the bathtub. Amalek jumped in first and said, we're going to show these Jews that they're not so special. And the idea was that by them doing that, then any other enemy of the Jewish people would follow suit. So Amalek really is considered the first of nations when it comes to anti-Semitism, comes to evil, comes to lack of belief in God, denial of good, and of ethics. There are two types of ways a person can be a Amalek. You can be a Amalek because you're born to a Amalek. If you read the story in the Megillah for Purim, we are told right away that Haman, he is from Amalek. It actually tells you that he's from Amalek, and therefore we know that he is an enemy of the Jews. And the Torah says that you should wipe out all members of Amalek from the world and wipe out their memory so that people shouldn't follow them. So one way is that anybody who's Amalek, they're born to Amalek parents, they should be killed. Now we don't know who that is anymore. The world is all confused. Nobody comes to you and says, well, I'm Amalek. Right? It might be French, it might be Italian, but nobody says I'm Amalek because we don't know anymore. But the second way a person becomes Amalek is basically it's a mirror image of us. How is a person Jewish? Because they're born Jewish, right? Your mother's Jewish, so you're Jewish. How else is a person Jewish? By conversion. When a person converts to Judaism, they're a Jew, 100% Jew, like any other Jew. They can say, God of my forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, even though that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob was not literally their forefathers. They're converts. They don't come from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but spiritually they've changed, and so they do now. It's considered as if they do. So when what happens is now the second way that you can become a Amalek is by conversion. That is to say that you believe in the concepts that Amalek stands for, and you become a Amalek. So when you hear people say that Adolf Hitler was a Amalek, so he might have been, but we don't know for sure because we don't know what his genetic background was. But he was certainly an adopted child. He was a convert to the beliefs of Amalek because of what he stood for, which was that he wanted to destroy the Jews because the Jews were the ethical teachers of the world. And he says so in his book, Mein Kampf. So here you see another way of becoming Amalek. So in this week's Parsha, we add this special section that talks about Amalek and about who Amalek was and what he stands for. And the most significant thing about Amalek for us to understand comes from the writings of the Ari, the Kabbalist, who says that if you take the numeric value of the name Amalek, right, every Hebrew letter has a number with it. Aleph is 1, Beit is 2, Gimel is 3, Mem is 40. Each one has a number. And so therefore every word, every name has a numeric value. So your names in Hebrew, you can figure out what the numeric value is. And there is a tradition that if another word has a similar numeric value, there's a relationship between those two things. So if a person has a name and there's a certain numeric value to their name, there's then a certain numeric value to another word. There's a relationship between you and that word. So one of the things we say is that there's a numeric value of the name Amalek is the same as the word Safek. Safek means a question. And from this we understand that what is the purpose of Amalek is to cause questions, right? That, in other words, that there is no purpose to the world. There's no reason for the world. There's no leader, no God to say that the world is here for a reason. Everything, Amalek says everything is random. Everything just happens. Like when somebody says to you, I can't believe in God. You say, why? Why can't you believe in God? Well, because of the Holocaust. Because of the Holocaust, I can't believe in God. Now, for a person to say that, I can understand. They're thinking with their heart. They feel they went through the war, a loved one went through the war. They can't understand how God could allow such horrible stuff in the world. When in reality, the fact that you are bothered by the Holocaust is actually a proof that there is a God. Because if there is no God, then there is nothing wrong with what happened in the Holocaust. Because God is the one who teaches us the ethics. He tells us that murder is wrong. So if you're in a war, if there is no God that tells you that murder is wrong, and you're living in a world that decides that murder is right, so then who's to say that that's not true? So that to have a God who gives us eternal and everlasting laws and ethics, we therefore know that these things are true. So what happens is Amalek comes and says there is no God. Everything is random. It just happens to be. It's coincidence. Everything is, he causes question in your mind. That's the purpose of Amalek. And therefore, it's our job as the conveyors, or the purveyors, maybe is a better word, in this world, of teaching people that there's one God, that God loves them, and you have responsibilities to that God. That's our job in this world. And Amalek's job is the opposite. He wants to make it that you don't believe in God, and that you have no responsibilities to this entity, and you can do what you want. Everything is random. You're going to live, enjoy yourself, because when you die, it's over. That's what Amalek teaches the world. Therefore, God says that one of the commandments in the Torah is that we are supposed to wipe out Amalek. He should not exist. As long as Amalek is alive, God says, I am incomplete in my relationship with the world. That there is a flaw in my relationship with the world as long as Amalek exists. And we read that Parsha this week for a number of reasons. One is we have to read it sometime because there's a mitzvah to remember it. So how do you remember? One of the most common ways the rabbis decided to cause us to remember something is to read it in the Torah publicly. So we have to do that once a year. So why this week? Because we understand the holiday of Purim had a protagonist. It had a bad guy. That bad guy was Haman. Haman, we know, it says right in the words in the Megillah, came from Amalek. And therefore it's appropriate the Shabbat before Purim, we read the Parsha of Zachor, reminding us what Amalek did to us and that we have to wipe out Amalek. And by the fact that we did not wipe out Amalek when we had a chance many, many years ago in the days of King David, so we have the story of Purim because Haman still exists, because he's an offspring of Amalek. Now, that gives us an idea of why we say that now. So the whole idea is that we are required in this week to remember that that occurrence, that God commands us to destroy Amalek, and that he should no longer exist. Now, there's a funny thing about this, which is, it says in the Torah, there's a mitzvah for you to wipe out the name of Amalek. Right? You kill all of them, and their whole philosophy of life should be destroyed and forgotten. So the fact is, we don't know who is Amalek today. We have no idea. So you can't go around killing people. We don't do that. But what do you do as far as the belief? Wipe out the memory of Amalek. Well, the truth is, in the whole world, the only people who remember Amalek is us. And our job is to forget him. Right? The whole world doesn't know who Amalek is. The whole world has no idea about this. The whole world doesn't understand what he's teaching. So then why is it that we have to remember to wipe out the name of Amalek? Let's just forget wiping out the name of Amalek, and the name will be wiped out, because the only one who remembers them is us. Right? Isn't that true? You go out in the street, you stop the first car, and you ask them, who's Amalek? They don't even know what the word means. There's no such thing. So we're remembering Amalek, but in reality, what does it mean we're remembering Amalek? We're supposed to forget Amalek. So our mitzvah should be to forget him, but we don't. We remember him. So how is it that by our remembering him, we forget him? So the point is that the Torah is telling us is that the teachings of Amalek are so destructive that they shouldn't exist. It should not be allowed to exist. That there is no God, that everything is random, that whatever happens to you happens to you. You're not godly, you're not special, you're just another organism in the world. And the world is a dog-eat-dog world, and you'll either succeed or you'll fail, and you'll hurt people to succeed, and you might not to fail. And that's your job. That's what Amalek teaches. So we have to remember this because we want to remind the world that it's false. Because you don't have to be Amalek to teach this. Other people can teach this idea. So it's our job, by wiping out Amalek and remembering the idea of wiping out Amalek, is our way of showing the world that the teachings of Amalek are actually wrong. They're actually forbidden. They're actually corruptive. They're actually destructive. And therefore we have such a mitzvah. And we do that this week. So we remember that Shabbos. Now, let us take a minute just to talk about an idea with Purim. It's a famous concept, but it ties into what we were talking about with the spices earlier. And it's as follows. There's a number of statements in the Torah that seem to be in the Talmud, that seem to be very strange. Here, the Talmud is reading the Megillah. Right? The rabbis read the Megillah. They know what it says. And they have some questions. So they say, Haman min Torah minaya. The Gemara says, Haman, where is he found in the Torah? What kind of question is that? Haman was alive in the Persian exile, 1,000 years later. So what do you mean, where's he in the Torah? The Torah is written, finished, and done before Haman's great-great-grandfather was even born. So what does it mean, where is Haman in the Torah, the Talmud asks. Then the Talmud asks another question, Esther min Torah manai, where is Esther in the Torah? Well, what do you mean? Esther also wasn't alive then. Her great-grandparents weren't alive then. What does it mean that she should be in the Torah? She wasn't alive. Abraham's in the Torah, Sarah's in the Torah, Yehuda's in the Torah. They were alive then. But these people lived later. It's like asking, where's Rabbi Rothman in the Torah? Well, I'm not in the Torah. I came around 3,300 years after it was given. How could I be in it? Then they say, okay, we asked you about Haman, we've asked you about Esther. How about Mordechai? Mordechai min Torah manai, the Talmud says. So now 3 times already, something's wrong. What is it saying? So the Talmud has a belief, which is an accurate belief, that everything is in the Torah. Everything, every person, everything is in the Torah. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not so obvious. They're asking the following question, not literally where do you find Mordechai in the Torah. They're going to tell you where he is in the Torah, and where Haman is in the Torah, and where Esther is in the Torah, and I'll tell you as well. But that's not the real question. The real question is, where is a part of the Torah that describes the essence of who these people are, of really what's going on and who they are. Right? So the first one, let's see Haman. So it says that there's a quote in the Torah that says Hamin ha'etz, that it came from a type of tree. What is that talking about? That's talking about the tree, the tree that God says that Adam and Eve should not eat. They shouldn't eat from that tree. I mean, that's what Haman comes from. Hamin ha'etz. It's a play on words. Hamin ha'etz, from the type of tree. Haman ha'etz. Put it together, you have the name Haman. So first thing, it doesn't say Haman. Second thing is, what's he got to do with a tree from the Garden of Eden? What's that? Then you have Mordechai. So there in our Parsha this week, it talks about the spices. One of those spices is called mordoror. Mordoror is a spice. right? So they say that's Mordechai. Mordechai, Mordoror, same thing. That's Mordechai. And Esther, where is Esther in the Torah? So it says in the book of Devarim, it says, Hester, Esther Panai. God says, I will hide my hidden face. And then another opinion in the Talmud says, Esther he Hadassah. Esther, we know her name is Hadassah. She had two names, right? And Hadassah is the same word as Hadassim, which are the fragrant trees that you have in your lulav. They also have a smell. People use them on Friday night for a fragrance. Some people use them for Havdalah for a fragrance. They're a myrtle branch, and they have a nice fragrance. So what we have now is Mordechai, Haman, and Esther all are some type of a fragrance in the Torah. Haman comes from the tree, like a fruit which has a smell, right? Mordechai is a spice that's found in the spices we described today. And Esther is Hadassah, which is a type of spice, a smell from a nice fragrance that came off one of the objects that's in the lulav and Esther. So all of them are like that. The point is as follows. If we look back in the story of the Garden of Eden, which is where it says Haman comes from the tree, Ha-min ha'etz, the type of tree. So it says that in the Garden of Eden, if you look at the wording, you'll notice that every human sense is involved in the sin. You have Eve talking to Adam. That's speech. That's a human sense. It says Eve looked at the fruit that was on the tree. She saw it. Right? That's using your eyes. It says that she heard the snake speak to her, and she spoke to Adam, who heard her. So that's your hearing. Right? And it says she took the fruit and she gave it to him, which he took. So they used the sense of touch. What you don't find anywhere in the discussion of the creation of the story of Adam and Eve, where they sin, is the sense of smell. The sense of smell is not included. And from this we can understand the sense of smell has not been corrupted by the sin of Adam and Eve. So it's on a higher spiritual level. That's exactly why when I described to you earlier how you could walk down the mall and a woman will walk by you and she'll be wearing a perfume, and a few seconds after she goes by you'll get a fragrance of that perfume, and you'll suddenly think of your mother from 25 years ago because your mother wore that same perfume. Or you'll be walking in the mall and they'll have a store that sells chocolate chip cookies and they're just finished baking them, and you smell that smell. And it reminds you when you were a child and it was a winter day and you couldn't go outside and your mother made cookies. Right? But why? That memory was not in your head. It came back to you because of that fragrance. Because a fragrance is a very spiritual thing. It has no substance. It's not physical. And it has the ability to do things to us spiritually that no other sense can. The other senses were corrupted at the first sin, but the sense of smell wasn't. Which is why the fragrances described in this Parsha is considered so holy. And that's exactly why when we talk about where is Haman found in the Torah, it's talking about Haman is involved in the story with the snake. Right? Where the snake tells Eve, take the fruit from the tree and eat this fruit, whatever that fruit was. And that describes Haman. When it talks about Mordechai, it talks about the spices. It talks about Esther, it talks about the fragrance from the myrtle branch. In each one of these cases, what we have is a fragrance. And therefore, just as the sin, the original sin that happens with Adam and Eve, when they ate from this fruit that the snake gave them, and it caused various destructive things in the world, the sense of smell wasn't involved. So the story of Purim is the use of that sense of smell to rejuvenate and to bring us back to a point where we are above that sin, where we have rectified that sin. And therefore we destroy Haman, who is the representation of that sin. That's the whole idea of the spices, why everything about Purim is tied into this idea of spices. That's why the Talmud asked the question when clearly you're not going to find Esther in the Torah, literally, as we think, even though everything is in the Torah, but they're doing it to teach us a specific lesson, which is the importance of these of how the fragrances, which Mordechai and Esther represent, were able to save the world. Because if we understand the story of Purim, then you have to understand that the Jews were about to be killed. The largest country in the world that had the most number of Jews, right, was what is today Iran. Today's Iran is where the Jews were living in the Persian exile. Iran was Persia, right? The king of Persia, right, eventually became the head of Iran, and that's what Iran is today. So the Jews all lived there. They were all going to be killed. And then after they were killed, they were going to send people to kill Jews all over the world. There'd be no more Jews. And he was going to do it. It was going to happen. It had already been signed as a law in that state. They were about to do it. And because of Mordecai and Esther, that stopped. It didn't happen. They were able to stop it. They destroyed Haman, and they were able to stop it. And that's why it's such an extraordinary holiday. And it ties into this whole idea of fragrance. Now, one other question, it's a common question, but I want to just mention it before we finish. It'll be our last one, which is when we talk about Purim, you'll notice that there are two rabbinic holidays, really, in the Torah. In Jewish life. There's Hanukkah and there's Purim. They both happen in the winter, and they're both not found in the Torah, of course. They came later. The rabbis instituted these holidays because of great miracles. One is that the Jews fought against the Greeks, and we won, right? And we were able to re-inaugurate the temple and live freely. Another one is the story of the Jews in exile in Iran, in ancient Iran, in Persia, and they saved the lives of the Jews. Right? The Jews' lives were saved, just like they were with the Greeks. And we also celebrate that. But the celebration of Hanukkah and the celebration of Purim are very, very different. The celebration of Hanukkah is done by lighting candles. It's very spiritual. The flame is spiritual. Olive oil is spiritual. Everything is a very spiritual thing. It's a happy time, but there's a certain seriousness about Hanukkah. It's not frivolous. It's serious, but it's happy, right? You give gifts to the kids. You give them money. You light the candles. It's a very good family holiday. The other holiday that the rabbis instituted is Purim. How do you celebrate Purim? A person celebrates Purim in a total physical manner, by eating, by sending food to friends, kol shalach manot. You send your friends food. By matanat avionim, which is giving money to the poor so they can buy food. That's the purpose of it. They're supposed to buy their Purim meal. You have a mitzvah to eat a Purim meal, and there's even a mitzvah to drink to the point of intoxication. Perhaps mild intoxication, but there's a mitzvah one time a year where a Jew goes and drinks so that their mind is cloudy. All right, so you're not thinking straight. You're supposed to do that, right? and that's done at the Purim meal at the end of Purim. So the idea is that now that's Purim and Hanukkah. They're both the same reason, right? Saving the Jews were saved. So why is the holiday of Purim and the holiday of Hanukkah so different? They really should be very similar. They're both rabbinic holidays. They're both because the Jews' lives were saved. But why are they so different? One of them, you're totally physical. Purim is totally physical. You eat hamantash all day. You drink. You eat more. Even when you do things like giving money, you're giving money for people to buy food specifically. Right? You're not giving money for a yeshiva or for a school or for a shul. You're giving money for people to buy food. It's an actual mitzvah. Every year I collect money here for people. They fulfill that mitzvah. You give me the money, and then I take the money and I give it to people on Purim, because it has to be done on Purim, who need money for food. Right? And that way we all fulfill the mitzvahs by doing that. So the idea now is you've got one holiday that's totally physical in how it's celebrated. The other one is by lighting candles. Okay, it's got a physical aspect, but it's very spiritual, very serious, Hanukkah. So why is that, since it's so similar? And the rabbis teach us the difference is that the holiday of Hanukkah, for many reasons we can understand, and we discussed it actually, Hanukkah is a holiday when the non-Jews, the Greeks, were not trying to kill the Jews. That wasn't their goal. They wanted to make the Jews Greeks. Because they wanted tax-paying citizens. And a dead Jew can't pay taxes. So they didn't want to kill us. They wanted us to do what they wanted. They wanted us to conform. Part of conforming to Greek life was accepting their religion. Back then, when a country conquered you, you followed their religion. Right? And that's what happened then. Right? So the story of Hanukkah is a story where the non-Jewish government didn't want to kill Jews. Wanted to destroy Judaism. We should stay alive. We should be people of the world, but we shouldn't be different. Judaism should be gone, but Jews should be here. Therefore, when we celebrate Hanukkah, we celebrate the fact that Judaism exists. And therefore, that's a spiritual reality. That's why you light candles. That's why you have a certain seriousness about the holiday. But the holiday of Purim, however, what does Haman want to do? Haman doesn't want the Jews to become Christian. Haman was just like Hitler. Hitler would find a Jew who was 10% Jewish. He may not even be Jewish, according to us. And he would say, that person's Jewish. I have to kill him. Yet that person could be a practicing Christian. For 3 generations, Hitler didn't care. They were genetically Jewish. I want to kill them. The story of Purim, which is Amalek, and Hitler, who was Amalek, are similar in that the goal of war against the Jews in the story of Purim was to kill us, not to take away our religion. If we would say, okay, we're not going to be Jewish anymore, we're going to start praying to Nebuchadnezzar, we're going to become followers of your beliefs, they would kill us anyways, because it wasn't our beliefs. They wanted to destroy the Jewish people. The Jewish people they felt were bad, so they wanted to destroy us. So how do you celebrate somebody who wants to kill your body? By celebrating with your body. Hanukkah, they want to kill your religion, so you celebrate spiritually. On Purim, they wanted to kill our body, so we celebrate with our body. We eat. We give money to people so they can eat. We go and we have a big meal. We actually drink to the point where we are cloudy. Our mind is not normal, because we are we're obliterating our body for the sake of spirituality, for a positive reason. They wanted to kill our bodies. We want to raise our bodies. Now, therefore, you see the two rabbinic holidays are actually very different, because the whole purpose of them was different. Hanukkah was the destruction of Judaism, and Purim is the destruction of the Jewish people, and therefore they're celebrated different. So with that, this Saturday night is Purim. We're going to, after the Shabbat is over, everyone goes home. They come back with their family, and we have the evening service. We follow it with the Megillah reading, and then we begin a day of parties, of festivities, of people enjoying themselves in many different ways. And the next day again, we have a Megillah reading, and then and our shul, for anybody who wants to come, you're all welcome as well. If you're on my mailing list, you'd get it. If you're not on it, you can be on it. We have a party in the afternoon where everybody stops by at my house. We have 2 hours that you come over, and we put out cake and cookies and drinks, and everybody comes by and enjoys themselves. They bring their kids dressed in costume, and I give the kids presents, little prizes that I buy to make the kids like that. They all come, and then after that we have our Purim meal. So we have a Purim meal here in the shul that people come to. You can have a Purim meal in your house, right? The ones in the shuls I like better, because there's lots of people and it's fun, right? And you're all welcome to do that as well. But that you have to reserve for, actually, by today. But yeah.
Sorry. How come we eat the ears and not the nose?
Why?
The ears.
Oh, I don't know. You mean because the Hamantash are called Oznei Haman?
But
I mean, they're called the ears of Haman. I don't know. The idea was that's what it looks like, but I guess you couldn't make it look like anything. Because the tradition that I had was that it was the pockets of Haman. Right? That it looked like a pocket from the clothing they wore, and because he used his money to pay off the king. But I'm not sure. I'm sure there's a reason, but it's certainly not found in Jewish law. It's in custom. That's what it is. But finally, part of the Purim meal is that we have something to drink. Now, people overdo it, and they're not supposed to drink till they're drunk, crazy, throwing up in the streets. And it's gotten so bad that the rabbis now have come out against it, that if you're going to drink, you have to drink minimally, and they're very careful not to drive, not to do anything dangerous. And the police know about the holiday of Purim, and they have the ride program, just like they do before the Christian holidays, where they catch the people drinking and driving. They stop your car, and you open your window, and they talk to you. They will have it here. They will do them all over our neighborhood, because people have been drinking and driving, and it's against the Torah to do that. It's wrong to do that. You can't do it, and it's against Canadian law. And if you get caught, you're in serious trouble. Serious trouble. It's not a small thing. It's not a minor issue. It's a serious problem, and you'll pay for it the rest of your life, right, if that happens. So one needs to be extremely careful that if you're going to have a certain amount of drinking to sort of muddy your mind a little bit, that's all you're supposed to do, is just muddy your mind a little bit. Not make yourself unconscious, not make yourself sick, not make yourself crazy, running, falling down. Those are examples of adolescent boys who are old enough that they're post bar mitzvah, so they have to fulfill mitzvahs, but they don't have the brain yet and the maturity to be able to understand what they're doing. So they hurt themselves and they hurt others, and in the end, it's not fun. I remember being in yeshiva as a kid, and the boys afterwards, my age, the day after Purim was horrible because everybody was sick because they got hangovers. Because none of the guys are used to drinking. They weren't big drinkers, and they would drink this one day and they'd overdo it, and they'd get sick, and they'd miss the whole day. They wouldn't pray appropriately. They wouldn't fulfill all the mitzvahs appropriately. And then the next day they'd be sick and they have to do things the next day. You go to yeshiva, you go to work, whatever you're doing, and they couldn't do it. So it's certainly not the appropriate thing. And so one needs to be careful. And you'll see signs all over in Purim about the importance of doing this with discipline. And you don't have to drink either. According to the opinion of the authority in the Jewish law, that if you take a nap for a half hour, right, also your mind is cloudy when you're sleeping, so that's sufficient. You can do that. So I guess when you're young you want to drink. When you get a little older you'd rather have a nap. Right? So either one, right? But one needs the active discipline. So everyone, you're all welcome to join us for Purim, and we have a schedule downstairs, schedule on our website. You can come by anytime you want.